Continue here tonight. Eskom has intensified load shedding to stage 4 tonight. It follows a trip at the Kusilo power station, which has since been brought back to service. But the unit is expected to take time to load to full capacity, Eskom says. This has forced it to ramp up rolling power cuts, which are expected to last until 10 o'clock tonight. Well, let's take a look at this story. Numsa spokesperson Phakamile Hlubi-Majola joins us now alongside energy expert Adil Nchabeleng. It's really over the wage increases that are being sought by Eskom employees. Phakamile, it looks like there is somewhat of a stalemate now. Those negotiations have not been going well. What has been the big holdup?
Good evening, and good evening to your viewers, and thank you for having me on the show. Where we are now is we just met for the second round of negotiations with Eskom together with other trade unions and members of the Central Bargaining Forum. And we have presented our demands. As Numsa, we're demanding a 15% across the board increase. We are demanding an increase in housing allowance by 1,600 Rand. We're also demanding 6 months paid maternity leave. And of course, for Eskom to narrow what is known as the wage differentials or the apartheid wage gap. So we've tabled our demands. Unfortunately, Eskom has yet to respond to our wage demand. They've only responded to the income differentials. And what we've said, and even what we said even in our engagement with them, was that we expect them to give us a full response to the wage demand and for them to engage on that. But more importantly, Kathy, one of the things that we've also made very clear to Eskom management as we negotiate is that we're not going to accept anything less than a double-digit increase. Because if you look at the exorbitant expenditure that Eskom seemingly can afford to pay for the cost of primary energy, they cannot come back and tell workers that workers do not deserve at least a 10% across the board wage increase.
Phakamile, when it comes to the overall cost of these increases to Eskom, have you been able to quantify that? So are you able to give us a figure of what all of these things would ultimately cost Eskom for the coming financial year?
Yes. So if we were to use the hypothetical figure of a 10% increase just for workers in the Central Bargaining Forum, which is about 23,000 employees, that would cost Eskom about 1.5 billion per annum. And when you compare that, for example, to the exorbitant cost of primary energy, which has gone up in 2016 from 83 billion to 115 billion as of 2021-2022 financial year. It's really quite shocking to see just how far Eskom will go in order to bend over backwards to pay dubious coal contracts, dubious IPP contracts, and yet it has the nerve to turn around and claim that it's too poor to increase workers' wages, as it said last year. We are not willing to accept that explanation or that excuse. If they want to find the funding, they must start by reducing the real cost drivers at Eskom, and that's primary coal.
Adil, let's talk about then where this money that the workers are asking for, where that can likely come from. Again, Eskom likely to say that, well, it has to spend money on coal, on diesel, and there have been big questions about the costs of these contracts, but it says it needs these contracts in order to provide what energy we have.
I think Phakamile has outlined it. There's a lot of wastages currently happening within Eskom, and those wastages, if actually were tapered down, were looked into, and some of the contracts renegotiated, a lot of savings will actually derive out of it. You know, employees' cost is not really a fundamental cost because they are actually fundamental with regards to the operation to the plant. So without employees, there's no Eskom and there's no functionality of Eskom. So at this stage, you know, 15% is miserable. You know, they should have even asked for more. But again, you know, the union has been considerate in saying that they want a 15%. And that's something that should have actually been considered, because if you look at the cost overruns, they are running in the hundreds of percentages with regards to how Eskom is wasting money. So a wage demand of 15%, it's at this stage not even, something that should be entertained, given the fact that we are in the worst part of the load shedding, where you need workers and you need workers' commitment. So at that stage, I actually support Numsa's call, even though their call was too conservative in a way that they were quite considerate. But it should be honored. Workers are being taken for granted and should be honored in this case and be given a fair wage increase in this current scenario with the current economic conditions we're all faced with.
One of the things that has been spoken about is the low morale of workers at Eskom. And when you look at the various issues that Eskom is facing, whether it is, sometimes the problems that they experience at their power plants, the sabotage, as they've described it, that takes place, a lot of it centers on the human capital and issues that are stemming from their labor force. Talk to me a bit about that, Adil, and if you think that a wage increase is likely to better relations that really do seem strained between Eskom employees more generally and the management there.
I mean, it's quite unfair to be using workers as an excuse for some of the basic management and top executive and board failures. In this case, I mean, as I said to you, without those workers, there wouldn't be any lights actually happening. We would be having a total, collapse of generation, and the whole grid will collapse on its own. So, at this stage, workers' negotiations are never going to be easier, because South Africa has created a culture whereby our workers, and I'm saying this because I've observed it over a trend of time, our workers are the least most conceded. Suppliers could hike their prices at any cost given, with regards to even going in hundreds of percentages in terms of price hikes. But when it comes to workers who are really the general mill of any operation, there's always a crisis whenever their wages to be considered. The fact that there is actually overemployment, the current 47,000 employees in Eskom, is actually a farce, because the same number was currently going in since 1990, has been almost consistent throughout the period of time. Eskom's capacity to generate electricity has increased. The number in terms of workers has shrunk because of technology and other things. But at the same time, there has been many efficiencies and improvements. And as I said to you, that if workers' wage becomes the crust of how Eskom goes forward, it shows you that we don't really respect workers. I mean, this kind of wage negotiations, if you could even hear some of the salary required, you'll actually realize that South Africa is not serious, in terms of how it pays its workers. I know people have made an assumption to say, an average worker at Eskom is paid 75,000. That's a lie. That was just an averaging of a wage bill, which most of it is actually inflated by executive pay and a whole lot of other allowances and bonuses that executives are pulling out of Eskom on top of it. And they actually compare that to wages of workers. Most workers are not even paid that amount, not even a tenth of it, So we have to put contrast into contrast here, on the basis that our workers are highly exploited. And in Eskom itself, we know the conditions that some of these workers have to work under, in terms of the strain on the power stations, particularly on the generation side, the aspect of the security in terms of how they are exposed to anything that could happen on accidents and everything, occupational health hazards and everything. So paying them good is an important fundamental element, starting point.
Phakamile, the one thing on many South Africans' minds, as many right now would be facing and experiencing stage 4 load shedding, is whether or not, this deadlock is likely to end up in strike action by Eskom employees.
Well, workers at Eskom are deemed essential, so they don't actually have the right to strike as other workers in other sectors do. So that's not really something that members of the public should be concerned about. We should be more concerned about the fact that we've got an incompetent person leading Eskom in the form of Andre de Ruyter, who, because of his incompetence, we continue to experience shocking levels of load shedding. It really is inconceivable in this country that we find it okay that a person with a legal background, who's a qualified lawyer, has been appointed to run an entity like Eskom, which is a power utility where you need to be an engineer.
Right.
I mean, I don't know about you, Kathy, but if I needed heart surgery, I would get a cardiac specialist, not an accountant. And we're doing that in the case of Eskom, and then we're surprised when we have load shedding. And by the way, did he not promise us that within 18 months he would have ended load shedding? And yet here we are, discussing stage 4 load shedding.
Phakamile, Adil, we're completely out of time. We'll leave it there for tonight. Thank you both for your time.